The girl had learned early in life how to stay quiet. Silence helped her survive. In a crowded city where people rushed past each other without looking, being invisible often felt safer than being seen. She lived in a narrow room at the back of an old building, where the walls were cracked and the roof leaked when it rained. The room smelled of damp cement and old paint, but it was the only place she could afford. Every morning, she woke up before sunrise, placed her hand gently on her growing stomach, and whispered a short prayer for strength. She was young, but life had already aged her. Her clothes were simple and worn, washed many times by hand. She owned only a few things, yet she kept them clean and neat. The mirror hanging on the wall was broken on one side, but she still used it to tie her hair and straighten her dress before stepping outside. Even on the hardest days, she tried to carry herself with dignity. When her pregnancy first became noticeable, she hoped people would show kindness. Instead, their eyes changed. The same neighbors who once nodded politely now stared for too long. Some whispered when she passed by. Others looked away as if her condition was something dirty. She heard words like careless and shameless floating through the air, even when no one spoke directly to her. At the small shop near her building, the shopkeeper stopped smiling. He no longer offered her credit for basic food items. One day when she asked for rice, he shook his head and said business was not charity. His words stung, but she said nothing. She paid with the little money she had and left quietly, holding back tears. The landlord was a hard man with little patience for anyone who could not pay on time. When he noticed her stomach, his face hardened. He warned her that families complained and said her situation brought trouble. She tried to explain that she always paid rent, even if it was late sometimes. He did not listen. To him, she was no longer a tenant, just a problem waiting to grow. She worked small jobs whenever she could. Some days she cleaned houses, other days she washed dishes at roadside food stalls. The work was tiring, especially with her body changing day by day. Her feet swelled, her back ached, and sometimes dizziness forced her to sit down. Still, she kept going. Hunger was worse than pain. People often ask questions that cut deep. Where is the father? Why are you alone? What kind of girl is this? Each question felt like a stone thrown at her heart. She never answered. Not because she had nothing to say, but because her truth was not something she trusted the world with. At night, when the city quieted down, memories came back. She remembered a time when her life felt lighter, a time when she believed kindness could last. Those memories were all she had left of happiness, and she held on to them tightly. They reminded her that she was once treated like a human being, not a mistake. Her body grew weaker as the months passed. Some mornings she struggled to stand up. The smell of food made her sick, yet her stomach burned with hunger. She skipped meals, so the little money she had could last longer. She told herself that once the baby came, things would somehow work out. She did not know how, but hope was the only thing keeping her alive. One afternoon, while returning from work, she found her belongings piled outside her door. Her clothes, her blanket, her cooking pot, everything was there. The landlord stood nearby with crossed arms. He told her to leave before sunset. He said other tenants felt uncomfortable and did not want her there anymore. She begged him for time. She promised to pay extra once she found more work. Her voice shook, but he remained unmoved. The neighbors watched from their windows. Some pretended not to see. Others looked with open judgment. No one spoke up for her. No one offered help. She felt smaller than ever, standing there with her swollen belly and nowhere to go. As the sun began to set, she gathered her things slowly. Each item felt heavier than it should. Tears rolled down her face, but she wiped them away quickly. She did not want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her break completely. She walked down the street with her bundle in her arms, not knowing where she would sleep that night. Every step hurt, but stopping was not an option. The city lights came on one by one, and the noise around her grew louder. Yet inside her, everything felt empty. She found a quiet corner near an old bus stop and sat down. Her legs trembled, and she leaned against the wall for support. She placed both hands on her stomach and spoke softly to the baby. She promised that no matter how hard life became, she would protect the child. She did not know if anyone else would stand by them, but she knew she would. Above her, The sky was dark, with only a few stars visible through the pollution. She looked up and wondered how her life had turned into this. She had never imagined being alone, pregnant, and unwanted. Still, somewhere deep inside, a small voice told her this was not the end. What she did not know was that her story was quietly moving toward a moment that would change everything. The people who pushed her away believed she was nothing more than a poor girl with a shameful secret. They never imagined that the child she carried was connected to a truth far bigger than any of them could understand. That night, as she rested against the cold wall, the baby moved inside her. She felt it and smiled for the first time in days. In that small movement, she found a reason to keep going. Unseen, unheard, and judged by many, she closed her eyes and held on to hope. Unaware that this was only the beginning of a journey that would soon shake the lives of everyone who had turned their back on her. The night passed slowly, filled with strange noises and cold air. She barely slept. Each time she closed her eyes, fear woke her again. People walked past the bus stop without noticing her. To them, she was just another shadow in the city. When morning came, her body felt stiff and heavy. She stood up slowly, holding the wall for support, and gathered her things. There was no plan, only the need to keep moving. Her stomach growled as she walked. She had not eaten properly since the day before. The smell of fresh bread from a nearby stall made her pause, but she knew she could not afford it. She swallowed her hunger and kept going. With every step, she reminded herself that the baby depended on her strength. She decided to visit someone she once trusted. It was not an easy choice. Pride told her to stay away, but desperation spoke louder. The woman lived across town in a small but tidy house. They had shared laughter years ago, before life pulled them in different directions. Standing at the gate, she felt her heart race. She knocked softly and waited. When the door opened, surprise crossed the woman's face. Her eyes quickly moved to the pregnant belly. The warmth she hoped for never appeared. Instead, there was discomfort. She was invited inside, but the air felt heavy. As she explained her situation, her voice shook. She asked only for a place to stay for a few days. The woman listened silently, then sighed. She said people would talk. She said her husband would not understand. She said times were hard for everyone. The words were calm, but the message was clear. She could not stay. The girl nodded, thanked her, and walked away before tears could fall. Rejection hurt more when it came from someone you once called a friend. Outside, the sun felt too bright. She sat on the roadside for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. Her chest felt tight, and her hands trembled. She pressed them against her stomach, feeling the steady life inside her. That small heartbeat reminded her she was not alone, even when it felt that way. Later that day, she went to a small clinic. The building was old, and the paint was peeling, but she hoped they would help her. She waited in line for hours, watching other women come and go. When her turn finally came, the nurse asked for payment before even checking her condition. She explained she did not have enough money. The nurse shook her head and called the next patient. She stood there, embarrassed and helpless. People stared. Someone whispered that she should have thought earlier. She left the clinic quietly, her legs feeling weak. Outside, she leaned against a tree and closed her eyes. Dizziness washed over her, and for a moment she thought she might faint. Her thoughts drifted to the past again. She remembered the man who once treated her with respect. He never looked down on her. Their time together had been simple and short, but it had meant everything to her. She had believed he would return. When he did not, she waited, then waited some more, until hope slowly turned into silence. She never told anyone about him. Not because she was ashamed, but because the story was complicated. There were things she herself did not fully understand. Life had moved too fast, and before she knew it, she was alone with a truth no one wanted to hear. As evening approached, dark clouds filled the sky. She found shelter under a bridge, where a few other homeless people sat quietly. No one spoke much. Everyone there carried their own pain. She sat carefully on a piece of cardboard and rested her back against the cold concrete. Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier. Water splashed around her feet, and the air turned cold. She wrapped her shawl tightly around herself, trying to protect her stomach. Each sound of thunder made her jump. She whispered calming words to the baby, hoping the storm would pass quickly. That night, hunger became unbearable. Her head ached, and her body felt weak. She wondered how long she could survive like this. Fear crept into her thoughts. What if something happened to the baby? What if she could not protect the life growing inside her? Somewhere across the city, a man sat alone in a quiet room, staring at an old phone. He had recently learned a truth that shook him deeply. A name, a memory, a moment from the past had returned to him with unexpected force. Guilt pressed heavily on his heart. He realized that someone had kept him in the dark, and the cost of that silence might be greater than he imagined. Back under the bridge, the girl struggled to sleep. Her body ached, and her breath felt shallow. She dreamed of being pushed away again and again, no matter where she turned. Each door closed before she could speak. She woke up gasping, her heart racing. Morning brought no relief. The rain had stopped, but the cold remained. She stood slowly, feeling pain shoot through her lower back. For a moment, fear gripped her. She wondered if it was too early for the baby to come. Panic filled her eyes, but she forced herself to breathe. She knew she needed help, yet she did not know where to find it. Still, she refused to give up. She told herself that surviving one more day was a victory. With slow steps, she walked back toward the crowded streets, blending into the noise and movement of the city. People passed her without noticing the struggle written all over her face. Some glanced at her stomach and looked away. Others stared without emotion. She felt invisible again, but she kept walking. Each step was a promise to her unborn child that she would not stop fighting. What she did not know was that forces beyond her understanding were already moving. Truths hidden for months were beginning to surface. Paths that had separated were slowly turning toward each other again. While she walked alone through the busy streets, unaware and exhausted, the future was quietly preparing a moment that would change everything. For now, all she had was her strength, her love for the child inside her, and the hope that somewhere, someone would finally see her not as a burden, but as a human being deserving of care. Days passed slowly, each one blending into the next. She moved from one temporary place to another, never staying long enough for anyone to take notice. The city had many corners and alleys, but none offered real safety. Her body ached constantly, and her stomach seemed heavier with each passing hour. Yet, she pressed forward, telling herself that she could not afford to stop, for the baby depended on her every move. One morning, as she walked along a quiet street lined with shuttered shops, she remembered the man from her past. He had appeared in her life so unexpectedly and then vanished just as suddenly. Their moments together had been brief, but they had left a mark on her heart. She had never spoken about him, because the world seemed too harsh for such a story. Yet in her mind she retraced each memory. Every smile, every word, hoping that somewhere he was thinking of her too. Her steps led her to a small park, where children played with laughter that pierced the heavy air around her. She watched them for a long moment, feeling a pang of longing for a life that seemed impossible now. She pressed her hands to her stomach, whispering softly, promising that the child would one day know happiness. Even if the world had not been kind to them yet, the park offered brief comfort, but it could not last. Hunger gnawed at her relentlessly. She spotted a small fruit stall and approached it cautiously. The vendor looked at her belly and shook his head. "Not today," he muttered, as if she were asking for a luxury she did not deserve. She turned away quietly, clutching the empty money in her hand. Each rejection was a sharp reminder of her isolation. Later, she sat under a faded tree, taking long, shaky breaths. Her body trembled, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. She thought of the baby, imagining its tiny hands and fragile face. She wondered what it would be like to hold the child safely in her arms, to feel love without fear, to finally be seen as a person and not a burden. The memories of the man returned more vividly. He had always been different, treating her with respect and kindness. In a life that seemed to punish her for existing, his warmth had been a rare light. They had shared only a few moments, yet those moments had been enough to teach her what it felt like to be valued. She had held on to that memory through countless lonely nights, using it as a shield against despair. But even those memories came with a bitter taste. He had disappeared suddenly, leaving questions that had no answers. She had waited, hoping he would return, but he never did. In those silent months, she had faced the world alone, learning the hard truth that life often gives no explanations. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, her body warned her that she could not continue without help. She felt unusual pains, sharp and insistent. Fear gripped her, and she realized the baby might be coming sooner than expected. Panic and hope intertwined in her chest. She had no family to turn to, no one to call for help. Every step forward felt heavier than the last. By nightfall, she found a small alley where she could rest, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city. She lay down on a worn piece of cloth she had found, trying to make herself comfortable. Her stomach twisted with pain, and she whispered reassurances to the baby. She promised that she would protect it no matter what. The thought of giving up had never crossed her mind. Though exhaustion tempted her to close her eyes and surrender, while she rested, someone else was far away, unaware that her life was at a critical turning point. The man from her past sat in a quiet room reviewing old photographs and letters. He had recently discovered something that shook him to the core. The truth had been hidden for months, but it was finally surfacing, and it demanded his attention. Guilt pressed heavily on him, and he realized that the time he had lost might have been irretrievable. He knew he had to act, though he did not yet understand the full impact of what he would find. Back in the alley, the night grew colder. The girl shivered under her thin shawl, trying to shield herself and the child from the biting wind. Each movement sent a jolt of pain through her body, but she could not stop. She whispered encouragements, soft words filled with love and determination. The world had turned against her, but she refused to let it crush her spirit. Her thoughts wandered to dreams of a different life. She imagined a small home filled with laughter, where the baby could grow without fear. She imagined a future where she was treated with dignity and respect, where love was not conditional on wealth or status. Though it seemed distant, she held on to these visions. Using them as fuel to keep moving forward, morning light brought new challenges. Hunger and fatigue threatened to overwhelm her. She struggled to find food and water, walking through crowded streets where people ignored her existence. Some glanced at her belly with judgment in their eyes. Others avoided her completely. She felt invisible, yet she refused to let despair take root. Every step was a silent declaration that she would survive. The pains returned stronger, signaling that the birth could not be delayed much longer. She found herself leaning against a wall, trying to steady her trembling legs. The city seemed indifferent to her struggle, filled with noise and movement. Yet she knew that somewhere, the truth of her story was slowly aligning with the man who had once been a part of her life. Paths that had diverged were beginning to converge again. As the day progressed, her condition worsened. She felt weak and vulnerable. Yet the baby moved inside her, reminding her of the life she carried and the responsibility she had chosen to embrace. Fear and hope battled within her, each heartbeat echoing in the small space she occupied. She whispered promises she could barely believe, vowing to endure whatever came next. The city continued its rhythm, unaware of the fragile life struggling in its midst. Cars rushed by, people laughed and argued, and street vendors shouted to attract customers. Amidst all this, she remained a quiet presence, unseen and largely ignored, yet her courage shone through every small action. Night approached again, and with it, the realization that she could not survive alone much longer. Her body demanded rest, but her mind refused to give in. She found a slightly sheltered corner, curled up as best as she could, and spoke softly to the baby. She promised that they would find safety, that someone would see them for who they truly were. The night stretched endlessly, filled with cold, hunger, and the weight of uncertainty. Yet she held on. Somewhere far away, the man's resolve strengthened. He had learned of the situation in pieces, fragments that did not yet form a complete picture. But each fragment pressed on him with urgency. He knew that someone had suffered in his absence, and that he had a role to play in correcting it. Though he did not yet understand how, he felt the need to act. To find the girl and ensure the safety of the life she carried. In the alley, the girl felt the baby move once more. She smiled weakly, tears running down her cheeks. Love, fear, hope, and determination mixed in a powerful way. She'd been pushed away, judged, and ignored, but she refused to surrender. The baby's life depended on her. She had made an unspoken promise that nothing could break. As the night grew darker, the girl drifted into a restless sleep. In her dreams, she saw glimpses of a future that seemed impossible yet filled with light. She did not know it yet, but her story was on the verge of a dramatic shift. Paths that had seemed permanently divided were slowly drawing closer. The moments of struggle she had endured were quietly leading to a point where everything could change. The day began with a gray sky, heavy with clouds that promised rain. The girl woke up slowly, her body exhausted and aching. Every step she took seemed heavier than the last. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and the cold made her shiver. Yet she refused to sit down for too long, knowing that stopping might mean giving up entirely. She pressed her hands to her stomach, feeling the baby move inside her, and whispered words of encouragement that sounded more like prayers. She walked along quiet streets, avoiding crowded areas where judgmental eyes might notice her. Each person she passed seemed to carry their own life, their own worries, yet none of them offered even a moment of kindness. She remembered the times when she had once believed the world could be gentle, when a smile from a stranger had lifted her spirits. Those days felt distant, almost like a dream she could barely touch. As she moved, the pains in her stomach grew stronger. She realized that the birth might come soon, and panic filled her chest. There was no hospital she could afford, no doctor she could call, no family to come running. The city felt enormous and indifferent, its noise and chaos contrasting sharply with the fragility of her own life. Still, she walked on, determined to protect the tiny life inside her. At the same time, far across the city, the man who had once been a part of her life had begun to take action. Each fragment of information he had collected pushed him closer to the truth. He had felt a heavy burden of guilt, a need to make amends, and a growing fear that time was running out. He moved through streets and offices, calling old contacts, searching for anyone who might know where she was. Each lead brought a spark of hope and a wave of anxiety. Back on the streets, the girl found herself leaning against a wall as the pains intensified. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe through them, murmuring soft words to her unborn child. She imagined the child's face, tiny fingers curling around hers, a small heartbeat she could protect. She thought about what life could be like once this ordeal was over, though she knew it might take years for even a small measure of peace to return. Suddenly, she felt a wave of dizziness and fear gripped her. She sat down on the pavement, clutching her stomach. The movement of the baby startled her at first, but she soon realized it was a reminder of the life she had to fight for. She whispered, "Hold on, my love. We will be safe soon. I promise." The rain began to fall lightly, a drizzle that quickly turned into a heavier shower. She had no umbrella, no shelter, and her thin shawl offered little protection. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to shield the baby, feeling each drop soak her clothes and make her shiver. Her body trembled, not just from cold, but from exhaustion and fear. People hurried past, holding their bags over their heads or rushing to cars and buses. Some glanced at her with discomfort, others ignored her completely. No one stopped. She felt invisible, abandoned, but inside her chest, a small flame of determination refused to die out. She had come too far to let the world's indifference take her down now. Hours passed. The pains grew stronger, more insistent. She realized that help had to come from somewhere, but she had no idea where to turn. Her legs trembled as she tried to stand, and tears blurred her vision. She whispered apologies and reassurances to the baby, promising that she would protect it no matter what. The world had been cruel, but she would not allow it to destroy the life she carried. And then, as if the universe had finally listened, a figure appeared in the distance. He moved with purpose, eyes scanning the crowded streets, as though searching for a single life among thousands. It was the man from her past, And though she could not see him clearly yet, something deep inside her stirred. A strange feeling of recognition brushed through her exhaustion and fear. He had heard fragments of information, rumors about a girl living on the edge of the city, struggling and alone. Guilt had driven him to search, but now determination propelled him forward. He did not know exactly what he would find, only that he had to find her. Every step he took was driven by the knowledge that someone's life fanned the life of a child, depended on him, the girl. Unaware of his presence, stumbled forward, trying to keep her balance. Her shawl clung to her wet clothes, and her shoes squelched with each step. Every muscle in her body ached, but she kept moving. She had learned to ignore pain when the stakes were high. She had learned to survive, even when hope seemed impossible. Suddenly, she felt an intense contraction. Pain shot through her, sharp and overwhelming. She cried out softly, clutching a nearby railing for support. Tears streamed down her face, mingling with the rain. She whispered to the baby, urging it to hold on just a little longer. She did not know how she would manage. But her instinct to protect the child overpowered every thought of fear. At that moment, the man reached the street she was on. He scanned the crowds, pushing past people, driven by an urgency he could not explain. And then he saw her, huddled against the railing, trembling from cold and pain. Recognition hit him instantly. This was the girl he had never forgotten, the one whose absence had haunted him for months. He rushed toward her without hesitation. She looked up as he approached, eyes wide with surprise and disbelief. No one had ever come for her. No one had ever tried to understand her struggles. Now, here was someone running toward her, with concern and urgency in his eyes. He knelt beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're going to be okay," he said softly, his voice steady and comforting. She felt a mix of relief and confusion. How did he find her? Why was he here now? But there was no time for questions. The contractions continued, stronger and more frequent. He helped her move toward a nearby building that seemed safer, a place where they could wait for help. Each step was painful, but with his support, she managed to keep going. Inside, they found a quiet corner. He called for medical assistance, explaining the urgency. A nurse arrived quickly, helping her to lie down and providing water and blankets. The warmth of human care, the presence of someone who truly cared, washed over her in a way she had not felt in months. For the first time since her world had turned against her, she felt a glimmer of hope. The man stayed by her side, holding her hand, offering words of comfort and reassurance. She whispered to the baby, her voice shaky but determined, promising protection, love, and a life filled with safety. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside, a fragile sense of security began to take root. The people who had ignored her, judged her, and pushed her away would never have imagined this scene. They had believed she was alone and powerless, but here she was, supported and seen by someone who mattered. The reality of the baby's father being present now would shock them beyond belief. As the medical staff prepared for what was to come, the girl closed her eyes, feeling the baby move and sensing the presence of someone who finally understood her pain. Her journey through rejection, hunger, and fear had led to this moment. The baby was safe, and she was no longer alone. The truth that had been hidden for so long was now visible, undeniable, and about to change the lives of everyone involved. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. Relief mixed with anticipation, fear mingled with hope. The arrival of the man from her past marked the beginning of a transformation she had never imagined possible. And though the birth had not yet happened, she knew that the hardest part of her journey was finally over, and a new chapter, filled with possibility and love, was about to begin. The hours passed slowly, each one filled with pain, fear, and anticipation. The girl lay on the small cot in the clinic, her hands tightly clasped around the man's. Every movement of the baby sent waves through her body that were both painful and comforting. The medical staff moved with calm urgency, and for the first time in months, she felt a sense of security. She could feel hope creeping back into her chest, fragile yet undeniable. The man never left her side. He whispered words of encouragement, told her that she was strong, that the baby was strong, that together they would get through this. His presence brought a warmth that she had not felt for a long time. She had spent months believing she was alone, that the world had forgotten her, but now she realized that sometimes the right person arrives at the right time to change everything. She squeezed his hand as another contraction came, sharp and overwhelming. The pain was intense, but she focused on the tiny life inside her. Every movement, every flutter reminded her why she could not give up. She had survived hunger, cold, and rejection, and she would survive this too. This child deserved a chance, and she had promised to give it everything she had. Time blurred as she worked through the pain. The man continued to speak softly, telling stories of a future they could have, a life filled with possibilities. His words were more than comfort. They were a reminder that love could exist even in the harshest of circumstances. She held on to those words, letting them strengthen her as the labor continued. Finally, for what felt like an eternity, a cry pierced the air. The baby had arrived. The girl's tears mixed with exhaustion and relief as she looked at the tiny, fragile being in her arms. The weight of the child, the warmth of its body, and the sound of its breathing filled a space in her heart that had been empty for too long. She whispered promises again, softer this time, filled with awe and love. She would protect this life, guide it, and ensure it was never judged as she had been. The man leaned closer, his eyes glistening. He touched the baby's tiny hand with reverence, a connection forming instantly. He had been absent in the past, but now he was here, and he would not leave. The reality of being the father brought a deep sense of responsibility, and he knew that he had to honor the trust and courage of the girl, who had carried his child through so much. News of the birth slowly spread, reaching those who had once judged and rejected her. Some felt shame, some disbelief, and some regret. The neighbors who had whispered and stared now realized the depth of her struggle and the strength it took to survive. They had assumed she was powerless, but the arrival of the child and the presence of the father revealed a truth they had never anticipated. Life had a way of revealing realities that pride and prejudice could not obscure. The girl rested, holding the baby close. Exhaustion weighed on her, but a lightness filled her spirit that she had not known in months. She allowed herself to imagine a future where the child would grow in safety and love, where judgment would not define their lives. She looked at the man beside her and realized that the bond they shared, though complicated, was the foundation of something new. It was not just survival. It was the beginning of healing. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, their lives began to change. The girl found small joys she had long forgotten: feeding the baby, hearing its first coos, seeing its eyes focus on her. The man provided support, both emotional and practical, ensuring she had food, shelter, and care. Together, they began to build a life where the mistakes of the past could be left behind, and the future could be nurtured. Even the city seemed different now. The once harsh streets became a backdrop for resilience and courage. She walked with the baby, her steps steady, feeling a sense of dignity returning. People noticed the change, some with admiration, some with curiosity. She no longer walked in fear, but with quiet confidence, knowing that her struggle had forged strength that could not be broken. The relationship with the father of the child developed with care and understanding. Trust was built slowly, each action reinforcing the bond. He had come too late to prevent her suffering, but he arrived in time to share the burden, to offer protection and love. Together they navigated the challenges of life, learning to rely on each other, and in doing so, created a sense of family that neither had known before. Months passed, and the child grew healthy and strong. The girl, now more confident, began to interact with the world differently. She no longer feared judgment because she had faced it and survived. Her strength became visible, not just to herself, but to those around her. She had transformed from a girl pushed away into a mother empowered, capable, and resilient. The people who had once shunned her came to understand the truth. Some offered apologies, some attempts at reconciliation, but she approached these gestures with grace. She did not forget the pain, but she no longer allowed it to control her life. Her focus remained on the child, on building a safe and loving environment, and on creating a future that honored the struggles she had endured. Through it all, she carried a sense of quiet pride. She had survived neglect, fear, and hardship. She had given life, and had claimed it for herself and her child. The man by her side, once absent, had become a partner, a guardian, and a witness to her strength. Together, they faced the world with determination, proving that even in the harshest circumstances, love and resilience could create a life worth living. Her story, once one of despair and rejection, had transformed into a testament of hope and courage. She had been pushed away, abandoned, and judged. Yet she emerged stronger, her heart open, and her child safe. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led to a place where dignity, love, and the promise of a better future were possible. As the sun set over the city, she held her child close, feeling its warmth and hearing its gentle breathing. She glanced at the man who had arrived when she needed him most, gratitude filling her heart. The past no longer defined her. The present was a gift, and the future, though uncertain, was filled with possibility. The girl who had been pushed away was no longer alone, and the life she had fought to protect was now a beacon of hope for them both. Months had passed since the baby's birth, and life was slowly finding a new rhythm for the girl and the man who had stood by her side. The child was growing stronger, and with each passing day, the girl felt more confidence in her role as a mother. Yet the journey was far from over. The world had not always been kind, and remnants of judgment still lingered in the shadows of her past. But now, she faced it with a courage forged by months of hardship and survival. Early one morning, she woke before the sun, cradling her child and watching the city stir to life. The streets outside buzzed with activity, vendors shouting their wares, children running to school, the distant hum of vehicles. She smiled softly, feeling the warmth of hope in her chest. The baby stirred, and she hummed a gentle tune, a melody that carried the promise of safety, love, and care. The man, now a constant presence in her life, prepared breakfast with quiet efficiency. The simple routines of daily life, once unremarkable, now held a special significance. Every meal shared, every small chore accomplished, was a testament to their ability to rebuild life from chaos. He moved with a careful attentiveness, always ensuring that she was comfortable, that the child was fed, and that the home they were creating felt like a sanctuary as the day unfolded. The girl thought about the journey that had brought them here. She remembered the cold nights, the hunger, the judgmental eyes, and the loneliness. Every struggle had shaped her, every obstacle had taught her strength. She reflected on how far she had come, how resilient she had become, and how her love for the child had been the driving force that kept her moving forward. She dressed the baby carefully, ensuring the clothes were clean and comfortable. Each small act, from gently tying a tiny ribbon to checking the warmth of a blanket, felt like a victory. These were not just daily chores. They were symbols of survival, signs that she had overcome the trials that once threatened to break her. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace. The girl walked the child in a stroller through the busy streets, feeling both vulnerability and empowerment. People glanced at her, some with curiosity, some with recognition. She no longer flinched from judgment. She held her head high, carrying the visible proof of her courage, the child who had survived, who had thrived against all odds. At a nearby market, she stopped to buy fresh vegetables. The man stayed close, supporting her with a watchful eye. Together, they navigated the crowded aisles, sharing smiles over small successes. Life was not perfect, but every simple act of normalcy, every small triumph, felt extraordinary after months of struggle. As afternoon approached, the girl returned home and placed the baby on a soft mat. She sat beside the child, reflecting on the responsibilities she now carried. Motherhood was demanding, and yet it was the most rewarding role she had ever held. She realized that her experiences of hardship had given her a unique strength. She understood fear, hunger, and isolation. And now she could transform that understanding into love, guidance, and protection for her child. The man joined her. They spoke quietly about the future. They discussed the baby's needs, education, and the importance of creating a safe and loving environment. These conversations, once unimaginable in her life of uncertainty, now felt grounding. They were partners, united in their dedication to the child's well-being. Each step forward, a shared commitment. In the evening, the girl prepared a small dinner. She marveled at how far life had come from sleeping on the cold streets to having a home where warmth and safety were tangible. She thought about the people who had judged her, who had pushed her away. There was no hatred in her heart, only a quiet understanding that their inability to see her strength did not define her worth. She had found value in herself, and that was enough. After the baby was fed and settled, she and the man sat together, sharing a rare moment of quiet reflection. They spoke about the past, not to dwell on pain, but to acknowledge the journey that had shaped them. Every hardship, every act of survival, every moment of courage was a thread in the tapestry of their present life. They had faced the worst, and yet here they were, building a foundation for a future filled with hope. As night fell, the city lights glimmered in the distance. The girl looked out the window, holding the child close. She thought about how life had tested her, how people had underestimated her strength, and how she had persevered. She realized that the journey was ongoing. There would be challenges, there would be moments of doubt, but now she had resilience, support, and love to guide her through. The man rested his hand on her shoulder, a silent promise of partnership and care. Together, they watched the baby sleep, listening to the soft rhythm of breathing, the tiny movements that marked life. In that moment, everything else faded. Past struggles seemed distant, irrelevant compared to the present reality of safety, love, and connection. The girl knew that her story was not just about survival. It was about transformation. It was about finding strength in the face of adversity, about nurturing life even when the world seemed cruel, and about embracing hope even when it appeared impossible. She understood that the hardships she had endured had prepared her to be the mother she had always hoped to be. Days turned into weeks. The routines of life solidified. She learned to balance care for the baby with her own needs, finding moments of rest, reflection, and joy. She continued to build a network of support, forming bonds with those who recognized her strength and resilience. Her confidence grew, not from wealth or status, but from the deep understanding that she had survived, she had thrived, and she had loved with an unwavering heart. The child grew healthier and more curious each day, exploring the world with innocent wonder. The girl watched with pride, marveling at the tiny human she had nurtured through impossible odds. Every smile, every coo, every small milestone reinforced her belief in the value of life, the power of resilience, and the rewards of love. The man remained a steadfast presence, learning alongside her, sharing responsibilities and offering guidance. Together they built a life marked not by the judgments of others, but by mutual respect, care, and dedication. They celebrated small victories, faced challenges together, and gradually, the shadows of the past lost their power. Through it all, the girl never forgot the lessons learned from her journey. She understood the pain of rejection, the weight of loneliness, and the struggle to survive. She also understood the immense power of hope, the importance of love, and the transformative impact of resilience. These truths guided her daily decisions, shaping not just her life, but the life of the child she had fought so hard to protect. One evening, as they sat together watching the sun dip below the horizon, the girl held the baby close and felt a deep sense of peace. She thought about the long journey, the people who had turned their backs, and the obstacles that had seemed insurmountable. None of it diminished her joy. Instead, it amplified it. She had overcome. She had loved. And she had created a life worth celebrating. In that quiet moment, she realized that being pushed away had not defined her. It had revealed her strength. The presence of the father, the growth of the child, and the rebuilding of her life had transformed pain into purpose. The girl who had once been alone and judged was now a mother, a partner, and a survivor. Her story, marked by hardship, had blossomed into one of hope, love, and enduring strength.